The wife who watched her marriage die in silence, a story of betrayal, realization, and choosing herself. The early autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves as I stood on the bridge, looking down at my reflection in the Han River. The water, rippling softly beneath the dim morning light, distorted my face, curving my jawline and breaking my features into fragments. I could barely recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were tired, lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but had long forgotten what. In many ways, she was a mirror of the life I had built, once whole, now wavering. To the world, I was the perfect wife. Elegant, composed, a woman with the right smile, the right husband, and the right life. We were the image others aspired to. Jisoo was everything people admired. Sharp, eloquent, always put together, with a commanding presence that turned heads when we walked into a room. Our marriage was a polished painting in a gilded frame. Beautiful from afar, yet the cracks beneath the paint had started to show. It hadn't always been like this. I remember when his touch felt electric, when coming home meant falling into shared laughter and warmth, when silence between us was filled with comfort, not distance. But that was years ago, and the seasons between then and now had worn us thin. The decline wasn't sudden. It came like rust, quiet, creeping, irreversible. The late nights at the office became routine. The glow of his phone, always turned away from me, grew suspicious. His cologne, once something I loved, mixed with a new scent, soft and floral, something alien in our space. The first time I caught it, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a colleague's perfume, maybe someone brushed too close on the train. But the scent lingered on his shirt collar like a ghost that refused to leave. I began noticing the smaller details. A receipt tucked carelessly into his coat pocket in a hotel suite. The date is circled in red. My hand trembled as I held it, yet I didn't cry. I just sat in silence, the paper fluttering between my fingers, my breath shallow. My world didn't collapse in an instant. It quietly unstitched itself, thread by thread. I thought discovering the truth would ignite me, that I would scream, throw things, and demand answers. But betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it comes in whispers, in numb acceptance. I didn't confront him. Not then. Instead, I watched. I waited. I searched for the man I once loved in the stranger who now shared my bed, but not my heart. I tried to bridge the gap, planned dinners, smiled more often, and wore the lipstick he once liked. He noticed none of it. Or maybe he did and chose to pretend he hadn't. It hurt more than I was prepared to admit, the way he looked past me, like I had become wallpaper in the life we built. Familiar, but no longer worth a glance. Then I saw her. Yirin. She wasn't what I expected. Not a seductress or a siren, but graceful, calm. So calm it unnerved me. There was something unshakable in the way she moved, like the world revolved around her and she needed only to exist to command space. She had none of my polish, none of the roles I'd perfected over years of marriage, yet Jisoo looked at her with a tenderness I hadn't seen in a long time. A softness that once belonged to me. I watched them from a distance once by accident. Or perhaps not. Perhaps part of me had been waiting to see it with my own eyes, to finally make real what I had only suspected. They were in a cafe, seated by the window. She laughed, and he leaned in slightly. Their hands brushed, not by mistake. The intimacy between them was subtle but unmistakable. A secret language in the tilt of their heads, the timing of their smiles. That night I returned home with rainwater clinging to my coat and the weight of confirmation pressing against my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood in the middle of our living room and stared at our wedding photo. My smile was wide, his hand firm on my waist. I remember that day how he whispered that he was the luckiest man alive, how I believed him. The next morning, he came home late again. I didn't ask where he had been. I didn't need to. I served breakfast, buttered his toast, and refilled his coffee. He thanked me like a polite guest. The silence between us was filled with unsaid things that neither of us had the courage to speak. I watched him walk out the door, his back straight, unaware that I had already begun to mourn the death of our marriage. I thought about leaving, many times. I'd pack my things, walk out, and start over. But every time, something stopped me. The memories, the years, the invisible strings that tied me to this life, to the version of myself that had lived in it for so long. I wondered if I was weak, if staying made me a fool. But maybe it wasn't weakness. Maybe it was grief. I wasn't ready to let go of something that had once been beautiful. I played my role, the devoted wife. We attended charity functions, smiled for photos, and made conversation with other couples who envied our perfect life. I became an actress in my own story, and no one noticed, not even Jisoo. The final blow came on another rainy evening. Seoul was drenched, the city glittering with reflections of neon lights and headlights on the slick streets. I walked without purpose, needing to escape the silence of our apartment. As I waited to cross an intersection, I saw them. Jisoo and Yerin, standing beneath a shared umbrella, his hand gently adjusting her hair behind her ear. Her laughter was soft and familiar. They looked like a scene from a movie, not mine, hers, their world, their story. I didn't run. I didn't turn away. I simply watched, allowing the rain to soak through my coat. I stood in the middle of a life I no longer recognized, finally understanding the depth of what I had lost, and what I had been trying so desperately to preserve. Not a marriage, but a memory. I went home alone that night. I didn't wait for him to return. The next morning, I laid the divorce papers on the kitchen table. The pen sat neatly beside them. There was no note, no explanation. The papers spoke for themselves. When Jisoo came home, I was in the kitchen, folding the laundry. He saw the documents. He looked at me. For the first time in a long time, our eyes met and held, and in that silence we understood everything. No anger, no begging, no pretense. It was over. The day I left, the sky burned with the same amber hue it held the night I knew our love had faded. I packed only what I needed. The rest I left behind, objects from a life that no longer fit. As I walked away, each step felt lighter. Not because I was free of pain, but because I had stopped denying it. I had stopped waiting for something that would never return. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was choosing myself. The absence of him was not the gaping wound I had expected. It was more like a quiet echo, a subtle emptiness that expanded and contracted with the rhythm of my days. The apartment I moved into was small, barely large enough to hold the essentials, but it felt vast compared to the silence I had once endured within a grander home. This silence didn't press against me. It cradled me, like a still lake refusing to ripple. For the first time in years, I was alone with my thoughts. Not in the lonely way I had feared, but in a way that felt strangely whole. Without the weight of pretense, of performance, of holding together a fractured marriage, I began to breathe again. The first breaths were shallow, uncertain, but over time, they deepened. Morning light streamed through gauzy curtains, painting the walls in muted gold. I took long walks by the Han River, often returning to the same trail where the willows leaned over the water. I found comfort in the mundane, in peeling tangerines by the window, in folding laundry while the kettle whistled, and in the way my feet knew the creak of the wooden floorboards beneath them. There were moments when sorrow returned, uninvited. A familiar coat draped over a stranger's arm in the subway, a certain cologne wafting from a passing body. Couples laughing over shared meals in cafe windows. Grief arrived not as thunder but as a soft patter, reminding me that healing is not a straight path but a looping, meandering journey. As weeks melted into months, I began to recognize the woman staring back at me in the mirror. Not the version of myself who had smiled through betrayal, who had knotted her hair perfectly before public events, who had stood beside a man who no longer saw her. This woman was quieter, her edges softened, her eyes darker with knowing. I never sought closure. What I sought was understanding of myself, of love, and of the way some lives fracture quietly while others burst apart. I thought perhaps that would be the end of the story, that the chapter had closed. But life, especially when it is cracked open, has a way of drawing in the inexplicable. It started with the dreams. They began as faint images flickering in my mind just before waking. A grove of bamboo thick and trembling in the wind. A pale moon casting long shadows across stone paths. The sensation of silk at my wrists, of a weighty sadness pressing into my chest like stones sewn into fabric. Each night, the same woman, myself and yet not, stood at the threshold of something unspoken, eyes filled with yearning. I began keeping a journal, noting every fragment I could recall. A face always blurred at the edges stood across from me in the dreams. A man. There was pain in the way he looked at me, as though love had passed us by again and again. No words were exchanged, but in his gaze I felt lifetimes. Then came the letter. No name, no sender. A single page folded inside an unmarked envelope. The handwriting was elegant, familiar in a way that startled me. I turned the page over several times, searching for meaning, for identity. It offered neither. Only the sense that something long dormant had awakened. At first, I tried to dismiss it. My mind clung to logic, to the comfort of routine. But the dreams intensified. Now, entire nights were consumed by them. I wandered temples, forests, and rain-soaked courtyards. The seasons in those dreams shifted like memories, fluid and overlapping. And always, the same unspoken ache pulsed through them. An ending that never reached its resolution. I began returning to places that felt drawn from those visions. Shrines hidden behind apartment buildings, forgotten paths leading to old Hanok rooftops, and streams tucked into the base of hills. Each visit felt less like exploration and more like remembrance. My feet knew the steps. My breath adjusted to the stillness. My heart, inexplicably, felt as though it had returned. Eventually, I found myself once again on the bridge. The same one where, not long ago, I had watched my reflection twist in the river and realized the life I had known was gone. The air was cooler this time. Late autumn had painted the trees in rich tones of rust and garnet, and the wind carried the scent of dried chrysanthemums. I stood there for a long time, letting the cold settle into my coat. The river below shimmered, dark and endless. It no longer mirrored my pain. Instead, it reflected something more mysterious, more ancient, like a memory returning through water. And then across the bridge, I noticed a figure. A man, leaning against the railing, his eyes scanning the water. He was unfamiliar, and yet something inside me stirred. Not recognition exactly, more like déjà vu unfolding with excruciating clarity. I couldn't recall his face from any waking moment of my life, but every cell in my body responded as if it had been waiting for this exact alignment of time and place. We did not move toward each other. We remained on opposite ends, the distance between us both vast and negligible. I couldn't explain the sudden tightness in my chest, or the weight of something unspoken passing between us in that stillness. It was not romance, not longing. It was knowing without question or logic that this moment was a return. In the days that followed, I carried that image with me. The wind sweeping across the bridge, the leaves spinning in the air, the stillness between two strangers who were not strangers at all. I returned to the dreams, now deeper and more vivid. There the story unfolded slowly, a past life, one where duty had torn us apart, another where war had stolen time, another still, where illness had claimed one of us too early. Again and again, love had reached only to falter. I began to understand the ache I had carried in my waking life wasn't just from betrayal. It was older than this lifetime. It was the echo of unfinished love spanning across incarnations, always arriving a step too late. And yet this time felt different. Not because everything would be easy, not because I had suddenly found a new version of happiness, but because I had changed. I had chosen myself. I had grieved, unraveled, and healed. I no longer searched for completion in another, but rather recognition of shared truths. And in that recognition, a kind of reunion that transcended time. In that life I had let go. In this one I had been let go. In both I had survived. The final dream came on the cusp of winter. Snow drifted softly in the scene, falling like feathers across a forest path. I stood beside the river, wearing robes of another era, my hair long and unbound. He stood a few steps behind me, eyes sorrowful but no longer desperate. I turned to him, not with expectation, but with peace. We did not speak, we did not embrace. We simply stood beneath the falling snow, side by side, knowing that this time love had not been stolen. It had returned not to be possessed, but to be remembered. When I woke, the city was blanketed in white. I opened the window and let the cold air rush in. Somewhere in the distance, bells echoed faintly, as if a temple had marked the turn of a page. I looked out at the sky, gray and endless, and felt the stillness settle within me again. I did not need to see him again to know that what had once been broken had been mended in some unseen place. Whether in this life or another, the story would continue. And for now, I was enough. The river no longer held my reflection hostage. The sky no longer felt too wide. And I finally felt free.